I'm very concerned about the oldest child. He is ADHD and cannot read the simplest books. I've worked hard, but no success. He has attended a class at FTCC and was not allowed to at Miller Mott because they didn't want to place him with children a lot younger, that would affect his self-esteem. I have no other options. Is there something out there that can help him? He's in 5th grade. He's 11 years old.
All of our schools, whether it's an elementary, middle, or high school, have what's called a student services team. The chair of that SST, you might hear them call it, is usually a counselor or a social worker. In a few cases, it's an instructional coach. But I would start with a situation like that of requesting a meeting with the student services team. And that way you'll have a chance to come in and sit down with a group of professionals and share specifically what your concerns were, just as eloquently as you wrote them on the card of saying that I'm concerned that my child is having difficulty reading. These are things that I'm trying and I need some additional support. And that way you have the benefit of the whole team to offer some suggestions, to give you some recommendations of websites you can go to, things that won't always cost things, and then looking at what are the services there at the school that can be supplemented. If you haven't had a conversation with a teacher, certainly you want to start with a conversation with the classroom teacher to find out what kinds of things the classroom teacher is trying as well to support the child in reading, to get some specific information from the classroom teacher in terms of what are the areas where the teacher is seeing that the child is struggling? Is she seeing the same types of concerns that you're having? But again, every school does have what they call a SST. And that is actually, when we talked before about the policy 3405, a lot of those referrals or that initial process of identifying students who are at risk and starting with a personalized education plan, a lot of times that eventually leads to that SST or that student services team process.
How are comparable services determined? Where can I obtain the comparable services state law?
I do have a copy of policies. Basically, the comparable services, it's just the wording that when a student transfers in the IEP with an active IEP, when you're coming in from another state, you are treated as an initial evaluation. It's not a reevaluation, it's an initial. That kind of goes back to the question I had earlier. So comparable, when it's the team sitting down and having that discussion and determining what would be comparable to what your child had before. As far as specifics, it doesn't say exact. It doesn't say absolutely exactly like you have. And so that is the current IEP team will review the IEP. Part of it is they're going to have some data as far as how your child is functioning, what are the accommodations they need, that type of thing. So there's going to have to be some time working, but it doesn't spell it out exactly. It just uses the term. And that, of course, when some of the things we have in IDA is open for interpretation. So, but it's a matter of having a discussion, talking about what services your child had, the team reading the IEP that has been presented, and then we also have to take the child through the initial eligibility process, which we can use the assessments if we determine that they're current and relevant that you had from before, from another state, or in some cases, the team may feel like they need all new information, depending upon how old the information is. So the exact terminology, it just uses the terms, but I can look it up in policy. I don't know the exact number, but it's there.
My child in a self-contained K-5 class, my child was in a self-contained K-5 class until this year. We were transferred without our consent or consultation and without the open house forum we enjoyed prior to beginning kindergarten. Do EC parents have any choice, as typical parents do, in choosing our children's school?
Individual school assignments for students with disabilities follows our general student assignment policy, but generally, when you look at students that require separate classroom placements, Not every single school in Cumberland County can offer a separate classroom that meets the individual needs of your particular child. And so at some point in time, it may be that, that as you move up in grade or transfer from one district to the next, that you may have to go to a school that's not your child's school that they would normally attend. So generally the process is, and this goes back to our student assignment process, is that a student is assigned to the next closest school that has a special education classroom that can meet your individual students' needs. Oftentimes, within the Exceptional Children's Department, we do have to move classes based on a pattern of student movement. And so when you see classrooms that may only be able to, we only project 1 or 2 students in a particular classroom, we may have to make a decision that keeping a classroom open in that particular school does not make sense without enough students to actually populate the classroom. And so we do have to make those hard decisions sometimes where students may have to be relocated. Generally from a year-to-year standpoint, I think the question was, do we have the open forum process? And that open forum process is specifically designed for redistricting purposes as opposed to program moves from year to year. What we do try to do is give as much advance notice as possible to let parents know that a classroom is closing. Typically, our hope and our efforts are to try to have as little disruption as possible for individual students, but from year to year, there is that possibility of movement.
Why don't schools with self-contained classrooms include the EC kids in school activities, awards programs, field trips, etc.? We try to embrace the school, not our district school. It's not our district school, but don't feel the school embraces us.
Really, all students should be incorporated in school activities, in assemblies, any award ceremonies that those individual students may be eligible for. So if there's a specific concern about this particular school, the first point of contact would be to your child's principal, and I would ask that question. For students in a severe intellectually disabled classroom, they may not be able to participate in the AB honor roll ceremony, but as they do any other types of ceremonies, those children should be incorporated and participate just like any other students in the building. So my first call would be to that principal. If you're not able to reach a level of agreement, you can contact the Exceptional Children's Office, and we will work with your principal to ensure that all students are incorporated into school activities.
When a child is determined no longer eligible for EC services, but the psychological evaluation completed by the school system recommends certain accommodations, like extra time for assignments or smaller assignments due to memory and processing issues, don't they refer for consideration to the 504 team?
Yes, the IEP committee can make a referral to the Section 504 team. That's, a very reasonable child find activity, but it is good to keep in mind that the Section 504 team has their own process. So the IEP committee should not be making a decision and telling anyone that they're going to get a 504. You still have to then go through that process to meet with that 504 committee. So it comes to the 504 committee as a recommendation. Doesn't mean that that child is automatically going to receive a 504 plan just because that was a recommendation in the psychologist listed in that evaluation as a part of their recommendations. So it still has to go through the process. Thank you.
After observing my child's EC teacher on several occasions, she is totally ineffective working with my child. What do I do?
Well, again, you have to go back and share with the teacher your feelings. That's important because anybody needs to be approached with a concern that you have. And again, instruction falls within the school and therefore you need to approach the principal. And if that doesn't work, then you contact the EC department. But you have to share with the teacher your feelings so that they're aware and so they can make any improvements, and then talk to your principal, because ultimately your principal is the person who's there to be an instructional leader, and they're helping that teacher to be a better instructor. So that's
What is the Cumberland County School System stance on mainstreaming versus inclusion?
I tend not to use the term inclusion very much. If you look at federal, that term does not really exist. I tend not to try to use mainstreaming at all either. I talk about least restrictive environment. And so as a stance from Cumberland County Schools, we offer the full continuum of services, and our focus is ensuring that students receive the services in the least restrictive environment possible. Whether that means receiving their services in the general education classroom with non-disabled peers, or possibly being pulled out, or maybe being served in a separate classroom. So from a perspective of that, we tell our principals there's no such thing as an inclusive school. We say we offer the full continuum of services, and those decisions are going to have to be made on the individual needs of that particular child. But we do stress the importance of least restrictive environment because we want our children to have the opportunities to socialize and receive the content with non-disabled peers as much as they possibly can, depending on their individual needs.
Let me talk to least restrictive environment. There are public reports for every LEA on our website. We have to collect data on 14 indicators that we report on. One of them has to do with LRE, least restrictive environment. So if you want to go on, Cumberland County has a public report as well, but we do monitor for that looking. I would have questions if someone said to me, as Ruben said, we only do inclusion here. And that means you're not offering the full continuum. If we see a majority of students being served on the separate continuum, then there are questions asked of those LEAs. So those are things that we do monitor for from the state level. We have, like I said, 20 indicators overall that we have to work with school systems on. There are outcome indicators and there's compliance indicators, but least restrictive environment is indicator number 5. And so, again, Cumberland is fairly, they have some good statistics about served in the regular classroom. And as far as separate overall, they're right almost at our state target, I believe it's state target. We have set targets, so we do monitor that from our office.
My child is in high school and is in a special education classroom at her request, but she wants to eat lunch with her peers who are not in special education because she was in regular education class last year. We were told she could not. Is this true?
It depends. It really depends on what's in the IEP. Number one, it depends on if that child has separate lunch, because lunch is a part of the continuum, I guess, when you talk about time with non-disabled peers. So that's one thing. The second thing, it could be that they go to the lunchroom as a whole together, and depending on the type of setting that your child is in, their friends may not have that lunch. At a large high school, some schools have up to 5 different lunch periods, so it just may not even be physically possible because your child's friends may not have that exact same lunch period. If there's an issue, a lot of times, while they're in the lunchroom together, they do like to have an adult sometimes close to certain students, just to make sure that they're getting proper supervision. The first thing I would look for though is the general ed participation page of your IEP. That's where you talk about, if you look at it on the left-hand side, it's going to have like all the different subjects, and lunch should be one of them. And if lunch says lunch with non-disabled peers or which the general education teacher, then that would be a point of discussion to have, because then they really should be having the opportunity to eat lunch with non-disabled peers.
I have a fourth grader who is nonverbal. Last year, it was his first year taking the EOG. He had a difficult time doing so, being nonverbal. Is there an EOG test that will serve him better? Can his teacher give the test for familiar purposes? Can his teacher give the test because she's familiar? I have a fourth grader who is nonverbal. Last year was his first year taking the EOG. He had a difficult time due to being nonverbal. Is there an EOG test that will serve him better? And can his teacher give him the test for familiarity purposes? So he's not with a stranger.
Well, this kind of goes back to what Ruben says, that there's only 2 courses of study in our system. And so we have the regular EOG, and then we have the Extend 1. Well, right now we have Extend 2, but soon to be disappeared. But we just have mandates. We have state mandates that require us to take these tests, and so we can't take away the test because it's difficult for the child. We still have mandates that tell us that we need to do that. But again, you need to go to your IEP meeting and talk to your teacher about if this child is not doing well because they're with people they're not familiar with. I'm certain that the school can work something out so that the child is taking the test with their teacher. But to find a different test to give, we only have choices that we have.
Well, parents of EC students also receive parent portal access, and what can we expect?
Yes, all parents will receive parent portal access. Right now, you may be sitting next to someone who says, "Ooh, I've got the new the new Power School parent portal," and then you say, "Well, what is that?" Well, the way that it's being handled is that they're rolling it out by district, because what they don't want to do is, like, for example, Ashley Elementary School have it out, and Max Abbott Middle School not have it out. So what they're doing is, as a rollout, our superintendent has asked that districts roll it out as a whole when they feel they're ready to roll that out. But all students, regardless of whether or not you're a student with disability, will have access to the parent portal. Now, the types of assignments, especially if you have a student that's served on the extended Common Core, the grade book is going to be it may look different because your Extend 1 teachers, they may not have individual assignments listed. They may have a comment listed on how the child is performing, but they may not put in individual assignments, but they may have comments in there regarding how the child is performing. Whereas general education students, you're going to see, they did assignment 1.1, which was focusing on numerators and denominators, or some sort of thing like that. Whereas for that same grade level, the assignment may look very different within Power School.
Okay, I'm going to read this, and if I misread this, help me out. Okay. From your answers so far, with reference to the Common Core standards, it seems you're saying nothing has changed, even though my child with mild ID has something. What did you say? I don't know what those 2 words are. has to something regular EOG on his grade level. So what accommodations can be made because he's 2 grade levels behind? Do you understand what I'm missing a couple of words in there and I can't read them.
As Susan said, we have the EOGs, we have the Extend 2 for 1 more year, and we have the Extend 1. The accommodations that are allowed on state testing, or the EOGs, end of grade tests, are all listed in, on the accountability website for testing with students with disabilities. So I think, I tell teachers, I also tell parents when they call me, I would go to the accountability website and look at this handbook on testing students with disabilities. There's some great information on accommodations and how you can select accommodations or what the child needs. So when they're taking these assessments, there are certain accommodations that are allowable. There are some caveats if there's some specific types of accommodations that are not listed. School systems can apply to accountability to see if they'd be approved or not, but that has to be done in advance. But I think just keep in mind these accommodations need to be used on a routine basis, so your child needs to be familiar with them. And yes, we do know that some students, whether they be students with disabilities or not, are not at the same grade level as the test that they're going to be given, but there are certain accommodations that can be used. Again, these assessments are to see how a child is doing on the grade level standards that have been set. And so it's a part of the accountability model, it's a part of what we have to report to the federal government as well.
Okay, we probably have time for a couple more questions.
I think I'm hearing that question about is that the disconnect between it being so high grade level wise. Am I right?
And where the child is,
Disconnect.
I can't hear what you're saying.
I think the disconnect is that you're talking about the test being so high on a grade level and that the mild ID student
Yes,
is.
can I respond?
Yeah, just quick.
You're saying the progress in terms of the regular standard common course of study, but if he's never exposed to that because he's not on that grade level, my question is what accommodations are being made for that? Because it's just an exercise in frustration to expose him to a test that he's never been taught anything on. You know, that's like me saying, I'm going to give you a test in Russian and do well with it.
I don't know
Let
how
me
to.
know how you make progress with that if you never learn Russian.
I don't know how to say it any other way but to say that the test at the end of the year is an exercise that we have to go through because of federal guidelines. Is this not correct? And regardless of whether your student is on grade level or not, we still have to do that. And yes, it is very frustrating for the child and for us too to say that we have to do that. But it's something that we have to do.
So, Miss Graham, is it?
Grammar.
You're saying there are accommodations that are possibly made for the testing purpose.
there are specific accommodations like extended time, test in a separate room. Everyone is working on reading skills. Now, some children are at different levels in reading, we know that. I think that's, and we do know that some students are going to have difficulty with these assessments. But there should be, as far as the curriculum that the children are being exposed to, they're being exposed to the Common Core and or the essential standards related to that. So it is a requirement that we're required to report on, achievement levels of students. And the main thing is that you have a good, solid curriculum being delivered to your child in the classroom they're in. And that is the test. I've seen the assessments, I've gone out and I've monitored for the accommodations and that type of thing. But do read through the accommodations manual to see if there are some things that could help facilitate.
And then I'll turn it over real quickly, but the other thing to focus on is as your students are getting older and are taking these tests is for certain groups of students, we know it's going to be difficult for them to reach proficiency, which is scoring that level 3 or 4. The focus that we have as a district is on growth. that you want to see students' skills in those particular areas increase from year to year. And that's really, as a district, what we've really focused on, because we want to make sure that students grow each year that they're in Cumberland County schools, whether or not they're a student with a disability or not. So while proficiency is a measure, especially for our students with disabilities, I always focus more on the growth piece for those individual kids, because it is very frustrating, like you all were saying, that you have a child that's 2, 3, 4 years below grade level, but we're giving them a grade level assessment. And unfortunately, that's one of our requirements that we're required to do, is to give them an assessment based on those grade level standards. But our focus, I think, if you look at the growth, that's something that gives you a better picture of how the child is doing from year to year.
Can someone explain the bus transportation options for EC students, i.e. bus from door to door if one-on-one aid with child, if only bus from door to door, one-on-one aid with child if needed, only bus if at home school? And if getting picked up too early and coming home too late, what are the options, i.e. pick up at 5:45 a.m., coming home at 5:30 p.m.?
I think from a transportation standpoint, the first thing you have to ask is whether or not your child would be eligible for transportation as a whole. There's that radius that you have to live within a particular school to qualify for transportation as a whole. The next step in terms of transportation, typically where you see students accessing special transportation is going to be either due to a physical limitation that requires a special bus to pick them up, or you have students who are placed outside of their home school. There are a variety of different options. Riding a regular bus with an aide on the bus may be appropriate if you're going to your home school, but if you have to cross attendance areas, that's not going to be very feasible because they don't have general ed buses that cross attendance areas. If there's a concern about the amount of time that your student is riding on the bus, I would recommend that you call the Exceptional Children's Transportation Office. I get a lot of calls from parents based on transportation concerns. However, unfortunately, I don't have anything to do with the actual physical routing. Sometimes, if there's a student that's on the bus for a considerable period of time, they can make some adjustments within the route, or as the year progresses, more students are riding special transportation, and they may be able to break that route apart to allow additional buses in that area. So I would contact the Special Transportation Office.
This is another one that's pretty common for everybody. When I arrive at IEP meetings, the IEP has already been drafted and they seem to just review decisions that have already been made without me. Is this predetermination? I thought this was supposed to be included in the IEP team.
I'll do
You
part
started, I'll
and
finish
then,
it.
There's nothing wrong with drafting certain sections of the IEP. When you look at just goals and objectives, maybe present levels based on what they're seeing in the classroom, those things are appropriate. Maybe they put some draft accommodations down there, just because maybe it's what the child had been receiving before. But that draft is just that. It is a draft. Typically, we do suggest that they draft a copy of the IEP, and it's okay to share it with you ahead of time and give it to you so you can take it home and review it. That is a very common request that we get, is that, can I see a draft of the IEP so I can take it home and look at it? And then you guys come back together as a group and have the discussion about the major portions of the IEP as well as anything that's been proposed. I think of a draft as a proposal, and then you guys get together and you work out what whether or not that's something that the team can agree on. We do not draft least restrictive environment sections, things that when you look at placement of the student, it's called the Deck 5. It's the prior written notice, but really you get it after the fact because it's summarizing the decision-making process. So those are things that should not be drafted. The minutes shouldn't be drafted. But it is okay for them to draft goals as long as you guys are having that discussion. It's not something that's written in stone. It's not this is what we've come up with, sign it, and let's move on.
No, what Ruben says is right. You absolutely are entitled, if there's a draft of the IEP, to ask for that before the meeting. I really love for parents to schedule a parent-teacher conference, even a month in advance of the IEP meeting, to sit down with the teacher and look at the old IEP and say, how are we doing? What progress have we made? Where are we at on these goals? And if you can even draft it together with the teacher in a parent-teacher conference, those become some really successful meetings and some really successful IEPs. So, but you need to make these things known in advance. If you have a draft of the IEP, I would love a copy of it in advance. If you can meet with the teacher in advance, that's also very helpful. The other thing is, if you have concerns, write them down. I think that every IEP meeting, you're going to experience the deer in the headlights. When I have my child's IEP meeting, I take somebody with me because I take my heart, I don't get to take my brain because I'm her mom. So take somebody with you if you can. Put your concerns in writing, because when you sit down, the people who do these meetings, they do an awful lot of these meetings, and they sort of have a pattern and a roteness, and you just sort of feel like you're in a treadmill. So bring notes when you have specific concerns. Make sure those concerns are addressed. There's 3 questions that they usually start the IEP out with, and the first one is, what are your child's strengths? And that's a really kind of vague question, but that's a really important opportunity to talk about what your child's strengths really are. And it's the kind of question that provokes some deep parental thought. It's not a fun question to answer on the spur of the moment, because I hear parents say, well, he's good at video games. Well, that's not really what you want to say at the IEP necessarily. Because your child's strengths, it could be social skills, it could be that he likes school, it could be any number of things. The next question they ask is, do you have any concerns for your child? Well, probably from the time you found out you were having a child, you've been concerned. If you're a parent, put those concerns in writing, because are you concerned? Yes. What are you concerned about? You're concerned about everything. But you need to articulate what those concerns are, because the IEP and the goals should address those concerns in some way, shape, or form. Those concerns should be addressed in the meeting or within the IEP. And the third one is, what is your vision for your child's future? That is a scary question for any parent, particularly for a parent with a child with a disability. And you can answer that question any way that you want to, because sometimes parents just say, well, I want him to grow up and get a job and be okay. And for some kids that's realistic, but for some kids it's not. It's okay to answer that question in segments. This year in school, or within the next year, I'd like him to make a friend. Or, by the end of elementary school, I want him to be able to spend half his day in a regular class. And then by the time he graduates from high school, I'd like him to be able to, do whatever would be appropriate, whatever your dream is. So you can answer that question in multiple phases, and that's going to help you and help the IEP team understand where you really, the purpose of an IEP is to prepare a child for independence, further education, and employment. So what you're doing in this meeting should be the long term, should be looking towards those elements in your child's future.
We really ought to stop right there, but I'm going to ask one more, only because I think it's a good question and nobody's addressed this tonight. Please clarify, explain why the Medicaid billing document must be signed, agree or not, during IEP meeting. I have heard several parents say do not agree because you will lose services. Is this true?
You're talking about the one-time consent for the ability to access public funds. We do that because as part of the Medicaid process, there's something called fee-for-service, which means that exceptional children's departments and districts can bill Medicaid for services provided. You do not have to sign that consent to access the services. It is something that is above and beyond the services that or the funds that we're receiving to serve your child. If you do not consent, that does not change the services that your child receives. The reason that we're required to do it is because DMA, who's the group who makes the rules for Medicaid, says that we have to obtain a parent consent to be able to bill for Medicaid. The common misconception is that if you sign this form, that it's going to interfere with your Medicaid benefits, and it does not interfere with your Medicaid benefits at all. We've had parents who have called me and said, well, my doctor had the claim rejected, and it's because you filed for Medicaid. And we've called the Medicaid office, and they said, no, that's not why we rejected it. It's because the doctor submitted 2 duplicate claims in the same day. And so it's all about the way that billing occurs. But we've been assured by DMA that us accessing those public benefits for fees for service do not impact a parent's ability to access public funds for any other service.
Well, obviously, we could go on all night. I mean, I feel bad if I didn't address your question, but I promise you we will address these questions, and we will have them available on the website.